At the gala, the billionaire husband's mistress said she'd move in. Too bad the house wasn't his wife. Gasps erupted from the audience. Women clutched their husbands' arms. Men loosened their ties as if the air had grown thick. The mayor's wife actually dropped her purse. Richard's face cycled through shock, panic, and rage in seconds. This wasn't the plan. Kayla was supposed to wait, to be discreet. She was destroying everything with her public declaration of victory. Have you ever watched someone you trusted destroy themselves in public? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. She watched her husband's mistress take the microphone at their charity gala and knew this was the moment she'd been waiting 3 years to orchestrate. The Atlanta ballroom glittered like a jewelry box under crystal chandeliers. Politicians in $1,000 suits mingled with celebrities dripping in diamonds. Everyone who mattered in Georgia society had gathered for the annual Children's Hospital fundraiser. Camera flashes exploded as couples posed for photographers, their smiles as polished as their personas. Richard Collins adjusted his bow tie for the 5th time that evening. At 52, he still commanded attention when he entered a room. Silver hair perfectly styled, shoulders broad in his custom tuxedo. His construction empire had built half the luxury hotels from Florida to Nevada, making him one of the South's wealthiest men. Tonight was supposed to be his triumph. The evening's program listed him as the guest of honor, the man whose generosity would save children's lives. His wife Denise glided beside him in midnight blue silk, her smile warm but her eyes calculating. At 45, she possessed the kind of beauty that grew more striking with age. Sharp cheekbones, intelligent brown eyes, and a grace that came from old money upbringing in Charlotte. Her pearls caught the light as she nodded to familiar faces, playing the perfect political wife. But across the room, a younger woman watched them both with predatory focus. Kayla Martinez had flown in from Houston specifically for tonight. 28 years old with curves that stopped traffic and ambition that burned hotter than Texas summers. Her red silk gown hugged every inch of her body, drawing stares from married men and glares from their wives. She'd spent 2 years as Richard's secret, meeting him in hotel suites and hidden restaurants. Tonight, she planned to step out of shadows forever. The evening proceeded according to script. Dinner was served on china worth more than most people's cars. Speeches praised generosity while guests calculated tax deductions. Richard basked in applause as the mayor presented him with a humanitarian award. Everything was perfect until Kayla stood up. She moved like liquid fire toward the auction podium, her heels clicking against marble floors. Conversations quieted as she passed. The auctioneer stepped aside, confusion flickering across his face as this uninvited woman claimed his microphone. "Good evening, Atlanta," Kayla's voice carried across the silent ballroom. Her Texas accent added honey to each word. "I know y'all weren't expecting to hear from me tonight." Richard's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. Blood drained from his face as he recognized the voice that had whispered promises in his ear just hours earlier. "My name is Kayla Martinez," she continued, her smile radiant with confidence. "And I have an announcement that I think will interest everyone here." The room held its breath. Photographers sensed drama and raised their cameras. "I'm moving into Richard Collins' beautiful Buckhead mansion tomorrow morning." Her words dropped like bombs in the silence. "He promised me half his space and all his time." Gasps erupted from the audience. Women clutched their husbands' arms. Men loosened their ties as if the air had grown thick. The mayor's wife actually dropped her purse. Richard's face cycled through shock, panic, and rage in seconds. This wasn't the plan. Kayla was supposed to wait, to be discreet. She was destroying everything with her public declaration of victory. But in the chaos of whispers and clicking cameras, Denise remained perfectly still. She set down her wine glass with deliberate care, rose from her chair with the fluid grace of a dancer. Every eye in the ballroom followed her movement as she walked toward Kayla with measured steps. The silence stretched like a hell breath. Denise reached the podium and gently took the microphone from Kayla's surprised hands. Her smile never wavered, warm as southern sunshine and twice as deadly. "Move in where, darling?" Denise's voice carried clearly through the sound system, sweet as honey over broken glass. "That house doesn't belong to him." The words hit like thunder. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The revelation hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Then chaos erupted. Photographers surged forward, cameras flashing like lightning strikes. Reporters began shouting questions. Guests pulled out phones, texting frantically to share the scandal. The mayor's security detail moved closer, sensing trouble. Richard's world collapsed in real time. His face went white, then red, then white again. The humanitarian award slipped from his numb fingers and crashed to the floor. Kayla's confident smile cracked like cheap paint. Her eyes darted between Richard and Denise, finally understanding that she'd walked into a trap she never saw coming. But Denise remained calm at the center of the storm. She adjusted the microphone height with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to public speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. "I think it's time we talked about what really belongs to whom in this marriage. What would you do if your spouse's affair played out in front of 300 witnesses? Have you ever watched someone you trusted destroy themselves in public? This is what happens when pride meets calculated revenge. Stay with me to discover how one woman turned her greatest humiliation into her most powerful weapon. If you've ever wanted to see karma served on a silver platter, you need to hear this story. Hit that like button and let's dive in." The security team approached, but Denise waved them off with regal authority. She leaned closer to Kayla, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to the front tables. "You have no idea who I am." Those 5 words would haunt Kayla for months to come. Because as the cameras continued flashing and the whispers grew louder, it became clear that the evening's real entertainment was just beginning. The affair began the way most betrayals do, with a business meeting that lasted 3 hours longer than it should have. Houston's downtown skyline blazed orange in the setting sun as Richard Collins stepped off his private jet at Hobby Airport. March 2021 had brought unseasonable heat to Texas, and his silk shirt stuck to his back as he slid into the waiting Mercedes. The Marriott Hotel project needed his personal attention, a 40-story luxury tower that would reshape the city's hospitality landscape. He'd built his empire on attention to detail. Every marble slab, every crystal chandelier, every thread count in Egyptian cotton sheets required his approval. Success came from perfection, and perfection demanded presence. The construction site buzzed with activity despite the late hour. Hard hats dotted the skeleton of steel and concrete like scattered coins. But Richard's attention fixed on the woman standing beside the architectural plans, her dark hair catching the last rays of sunlight. Kayla Martinez commanded the construction crew with the authority of someone half their age and twice their education. At 25, she'd already earned her general contractor's license and built a reputation for finishing projects ahead of schedule and under budget. Her curves filled out a hard hat and safety vest in ways that made grown men forget their own names. "Mr. Collins," she extended her hand with professional confidence. "Thank you for coming down personally. I know your time is valuable." Her grip was firm, her gaze direct. Richard found himself holding her hand longer than business required. The meeting stretched from 6 o'clock to 9. Then 9 became 10 as they discussed foundation issues over dinner at a nearby steakhouse. By 11, they were sitting in the hotel bar, construction forgotten as conversation flowed like expensive whiskey. Richard talked about building empires. Kayla shared dreams of starting her own development company. He was charmed by her ambition, intoxicated by her youth. She was fascinated by his power, drawn to his experience. When the elevator doors closed on the 20th floor, they were standing closer than professional distance allowed. "Which room is yours?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He showed her. The hotel suite overlooked downtown Houston, city lights twinkling like fallen stars. Richard's wedding ring caught the glow from the windows as he set it carefully on the nightstand. Kayla watched him with dark eyes that held no judgment, only hunger. Their first kiss tasted like whiskey and forbidden promises. Her lips were soft, eager, nothing like Denise's careful restraint. When she pulled his shirt over his head, her touch was fire against his skin. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his last moment of conscience. "I've never been more sure of anything," she breathed against his neck. They made love with desperate passion, as if they could somehow justify the betrayal through intensity. Richard forgot about his wife sleeping in their Georgia mansion. Kayla forgot about the complications of mixing business with pleasure. For 3 hours, nothing existed except skin against skin and whispered promises of a future neither fully understood. Back in Atlanta, Denise Collins sat in her home office reviewing bank statements. Something felt wrong. Not dramatically, just subtly off balance like a picture hanging crooked. Richard's travel expenses had increased. Business trips lasted longer. Phone calls became more frequent and more private. When she asked about Houston, his answers were detailed yet somehow hollow, like reciting a script. Denise had grown up as the daughter of a school principal and a nurse in Charlotte. Her parents taught her to trust but verify, to hope for the best while preparing for disappointment. Those lessons served her well in the early years of marriage when Richard's business faced near bankruptcy. She'd quietly liquidated her inheritance from Uncle Marcus, South Carolina real estate, that had appreciated beyond her wildest dreams, to save Richard's company. The Buckhead mansion, the one everyone assumed he'd bought with construction profits, had actually been purchased with her family's old money. But Richard didn't know that. The deed bore both their names, but the down payment and mortgage payments came from accounts he'd never seen. It was easier to let him believe his success was entirely self-made. Men's egos were fragile things, and she'd learned to protect his while protecting her own interests. Now, studying receipts from Houston hotels and restaurants, Denise felt a familiar tingle of suspicion her mother had warned her to never ignore. She hired a private investigator the next week. The first photos arrived in a manila envelope marked confidential. Richard and Kayla entering the Marriott together, leaving separately but within minutes of each other. Her hand on his arm outside a restaurant, his fingers trailing across her back as they waited for an elevator. Denise studied each image with the detached interest of a scientist examining specimens. No tears, no tantrums. Just cold calculation of evidence and options. The second envelope contained hotel records. The third showed bank transactions, expensive dinners, jewelry purchases, weekend trips to Dallas and Miami. Richard wasn't just having an affair. He was financing a lifestyle for his mistress. With Denise's money, that realization changed everything. She opened new bank accounts that week, transferred funds with surgical precision, consulted lawyers about asset protection. If Richard wanted to play games with other women, he could do it with his own resources. But she wasn't ready to file for divorce. Not yet. Denise had learned patience from watching her parents navigate 35 years of marriage through good times and bad. Sometimes patience was strategy. Sometimes it was survival. Have you ever felt that gut instinct that something was wrong, even when everything looked perfect? What did you do about it? Share your story in the comments. Months passed. The affair intensified. Richard grew bolder, making less effort to hide his Houston trips. Kayla sent him photos from her new apartment, furniture he'd helped choose, artwork he'd paid for, a lifestyle built on his wife's inheritance. Denise documented everything: bank statements, hotel receipts, restaurant charges, jewelry store purchases. She built a case like a prosecutor preparing for trial. The private investigator's photos arrived weekly. Richard and Kayla in Dallas hotel suites. Shopping trips where he bought her designer clothes. Weekend getaways to Miami beaches where they walked hand in hand like a couple celebrating their anniversary. Each image was filed away with methodical precision. Evidence for a future she was still planning. The Houston project finished ahead of schedule in December 2023. Richard returned to Atlanta flushed with success, eager to discuss his next venture. Over dinner at their favorite restaurant, he mentioned wanting to expand further into Texas markets. "Houston has incredible potential," he said, cutting his steak with unusual enthusiasm. The market demographics are perfect for luxury hospitality. I'm thinking of opening a regional office there. Denise smiled and sipped her wine. How exciting. Would that require much travel? Some, but I think the investment would pay off long-term. She nodded supportively, playing the role of devoted wife while calculating how much this expansion would cost her family's wealth. That night, as Richard slept beside her, Denise made her decision. The charity gala was 4 months away. Atlanta's social elite would gather in one ballroom. Cameras would record everything, and Richard would finally face the consequences of his choices. The private investigator's photos arrived on a Tuesday in March 2024. By Wednesday, Denise had opened 3 new bank accounts. By Thursday, she was planning a party that would change all their lives forever. Because if Richard wanted to build his empire on her foundation, she was going to make sure everyone knew exactly who owned the ground he stood on. Everyone assumed she married him for his money, but the truth was far more dangerous. He had married her for hers. The misconception began at their wedding reception 15 years earlier. Richard Collins, the rising construction magnate, had swept Charlotte society's most eligible woman off her feet. Guests whispered about the fairy tale romance. The self-made businessman and the principal's daughter who'd landed the catch of the decade. They were all wrong. Denise Matthews grew up in a modest 2-story house on Elm Street in Charlotte's Myers Park neighborhood. Her father ran the local elementary school with iron discipline and genuine care. Her mother worked double shifts at Mercy Hospital, healing broken bodies while teaching her daughter that dignity came from service, not status. Money doesn't make you better than anyone, her mother would say, bandaging scraped knees in their small kitchen. But poverty doesn't make you noble either. The goal is independence, earning enough to help others without needing help yourself. Those lessons shaped Denise more than any finishing school ever could. Uncle Marcus was different. Her father's older brother had abandoned education for real estate, buying rundown properties in Charleston and Columbia when nobody wanted them. While other families gathered for Sunday dinners, Marcus spent weekends driving through South Carolina's forgotten neighborhoods, seeing potential where others saw problems. Land doesn't lie, he told 12-year-old Denise during one of his rare visits. Politicians lie, bankers lie, even family lies sometimes. But dirt? Dirt tells you the truth about what something's really worth. He left her everything when she turned 25. Not because she was his favorite niece, but because she was the only one who listened when he explained the difference between price and value. The inheritance shocked everyone, including Denise. 17 properties scattered across South Carolina's coast and inland cities. Some were rental houses generating steady income. Others were empty lots in neighborhoods on the verge of gentrification. A few were commercial buildings with long-term leases to reliable tenants. Combined, they were worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. Denise was working as a fundraising coordinator for Charlotte's Arts Council when the lawyers called. She'd graduated from UNC with a business degree, but chose nonprofit work because it felt meaningful. Her salary barely covered her apartment rent and student loans, but she was proud of her independence. The inheritance changed everything and nothing. She kept her job, kept her modest apartment, kept driving her reliable Honda Civic. But she also quietly began managing Uncle Marcus's portfolio, learning about property values and market trends during evenings and weekends. Real estate, she discovered, was like chess. Success required thinking several moves ahead, anticipating what others would want before they knew they wanted it. Uncle Marcus had been a master of the game, buying coastal property when everyone said the beaches were too remote, purchasing downtown lots when businesses were fleeing to suburbs. By the time she met Richard Collins at a hospital fundraiser in 2007, her portfolio had doubled in value. She was 30 when he swept into the charity auction like he owned the building. Tall, confident, with the kind of smile that made women forget their own names. His construction company had just completed Charlotte's newest luxury hotel, and he was being celebrated as the city's rising star. Richard bid aggressively on everything. Weekend getaways, artwork, dinner packages worth thousands of dollars. when he won a week in Tuscany for $25,000. The crowd applauded his generosity. Denise found his display slightly vulgar. Old money didn't announce itself so loudly. But when he approached her table during the reception, his charm was undeniable. "You're the only woman here who didn't applaud my Tuscany bid," he said, settling into the empty chair beside her. "Either you think I'm foolish or you're not impressed by grand gestures." "Maybe both," she replied, surprised by her own boldness. He laughed, not the practiced chuckle of a man used to flattery, but genuine amusement. "I like honest women. They're rare in my business." They talked until the cleaning crew began stacking chairs. Richard spoke passionately about building things that lasted, creating spaces where families made memories. Denise shared her vision for arts programs that brought culture to underserved communities. He was ambitious but not ruthless, confident but willing to laugh at himself. When he asked for her number, she gave it to him. Their courtship unfolded like a romantic novel. Dinners at elegant restaurants, weekend trips to mountain resorts, long conversations about dreams and values. Richard was building an empire, but he also volunteered at Habitat for Humanity. He drove expensive cars but sent money to his parents in Dallas every month. When he proposed on a Charleston beach at sunset, Denise said yes because she loved the man he was, not the fortune everyone assumed he possessed. The wedding was Charlotte's social event of the year. 500 guests, cathedral ceremony, reception at the country club where her father had once worked as a groundskeeper. Richard's construction empire paid for everything, or so everyone believed. Actually, Denise had quietly sold 2 of her South Carolina properties to fund the celebration. Richard's company was growing, but cash flow was tight. She didn't want him starting their marriage in debt over one night's celebration. It was easier to let people think he was rich. The pattern continued throughout their marriage. When Richard's company nearly went bankrupt in 2010, Denise liquidated coastal properties to provide bridge financing. When he wanted to expand into luxury hotels, she sold downtown Charleston buildings to fund the venture. Each time, she let him believe the money came from his own success. Men's egos were delicate things, and she'd learned that marriages were stronger when husbands felt like providers. The Buckhead Mansion was her wedding gift to them both. She'd spotted the property during one of Richard's Atlanta business trips, recognizing its potential before developers started circling. The deed bore both their names, but every mortgage payment came from accounts Richard didn't know existed. He never asked. She never explained. It worked perfectly until Richard started spending their money on another woman. When was the last time someone completely underestimated you? Did you let them? But did you prove them wrong? Tell me in the comments. The night Richard first brought Kayla to their house, Denise was watching from the security cameras she'd had installed months earlier. She saw everything, including the moment Kayla stood in the master bedroom and said she deserved better than some rich man's wife's decorating. That's when Denise realized her patience had limits, and her husband's mistress was about to discover exactly who owned the ground she was standing on. She spent 18 months letting him think he was getting away with it, while she orchestrated the most public downfall in Atlanta's social history. The transformation began subtly, like storm clouds gathering on a clear horizon. Richard returned from his Houston trips with renewed energy, whistling in the shower and buying new clothes. He started working out again, trading his business lunches for protein shakes and gym sessions. Midlife crisis. Their friends joked when Richard showed up at the country club 20 pounds lighter and wearing designer jeans instead of his usual khakis. Denise smiled and nodded, playing the supportive wife while documenting every change in behavior. The private investigators' reports painted a picture of a man intoxicated by secret romance. Hotel receipts showed upgraded suites. Restaurant charges revealed increasingly expensive dinners for 2. Jewelry store purchases marked special occasions Denise didn't recognize. Valentine's Day 2023. Diamond tennis bracelet from Tiffany, $15,000. Their wedding anniversary. Dinner at home with Denise. Novivtsikshunth. Kayla's birthday in April. Weekend trip to Miami, first-class flights. Oceanfront suite at the Four Seasons, $8,000 total. Each expenditure was documented, photographed, and filed away like evidence in a criminal case. Richard grew careless as the months passed. Credit card statements arrived with charges in cities where he claimed to have no business. His phone buzzed at odd hours with text messages he read in private, smiling at the screen like a teenager with his first crush. During a dinner party at their home, Denise watched him excuse himself to take a call in his study. Through the closed door, she heard his voice drop to the intimate tone he'd once used with her. "I miss you too," he murmured. "Next weekend can't come fast enough." Their guests continued eating and chatting, oblivious to the betrayal unfolding in the next room. Denise refilled wine glasses and laughed at appropriate moments, while calculating how much of her family's money Richard was spending on his affair. The private investigator provided more than photos. Background checks revealed Gala Martinez's history: ambitious woman from modest Houston family, business degree from Texas A&M, construction career built on competence and determination. She wasn't a gold digger in the traditional sense. She was a smart woman making bad choices about married men. That made her more dangerous than a simple opportunist. Smart women planned. They strategized. They didn't settle for secret hotel meetings when they could demand permanent arrangements. Denise began preparing for war. She transferred assets with surgical precision. Rental properties in South Carolina were placed in a trust bearing only her name. The Buckhead Mansion's deed was quietly amended to reflect its true ownership history. Bank accounts Richard had never seen were opened in different states. If Richard wanted to finance another woman's lifestyle, he could do it with money he'd actually earned. Her lawyer, Patricia Hawkins, had handled the original property transfers when Denise inherited Uncle Marcus's empire. Patricia specialized in asset protection for wealthy women who'd learned to be cautious about men with expensive tastes. "You're being smart," Patricia said during one of their private meetings. "Too many women wait until after the divorce to protect their assets. By then, it's too late." They met in Patricia's downtown Atlanta office, away from social circles where gossip traveled faster than wildfire. The legal documents were complex but clear. Denise's inherited wealth remained separate from marital property, protected by prenuptial agreements Richard had signed without careful reading. "He was so eager to marry you, he barely glanced at the financial clauses," Patricia noted. Men in love make terrible negotiators. Meanwhile, Richard's affair intensified. The Houston project expanded into a regional office, giving him legitimate reasons for frequent travel. Gala began posting cryptic social media photos, expensive dinners, luxury hotel rooms, designer handbags that cost more than most people's rent. She was getting bold. That was dangerous for everyone involved. In January 2024, Richard announced his intention to host that year's Children's Hospital Charity Gala. "It'll be good for the company image," he explained over breakfast, scrolling through potential venues on his tablet. "Plus, supporting children's medical care is the right thing to do." Denise agreed enthusiastically. The gala would provide the perfect stage for the performance she'd been planning. She volunteered to handle the guest list. Richard was busy with construction projects, so she managed invitations, seating arrangements, and media coverage. Every detail was planned with military precision. Atlanta's social elite would gather in one ballroom. Photographers would document everything. Television cameras would broadcast live updates. The mayor would attend. State senators would mingle with celebrities and business leaders. It would be the biggest audience in Atlanta's social calendar, perfect for the biggest revelation in the city's recent history. The private investigator's final report arrived in March. Gala Martinez had purchased a red silk gown from a boutique in Houston. She'd booked a flight to Atlanta for the weekend of the gala. Hotel reservations showed she was staying at the Ritz-Carlton downtown. Not with Richard, but close enough for convenient access. Most importantly, she'd been asking questions about the Collins family wealth. Social media searches, public records requests, background checks on Denise's family connections. Gala wasn't just planning to attend a gala. She was planning to make a statement. What's the difference between patience and plotting? Between justice and revenge? Share your thoughts below about when it's right to fight back. 3 days before the gala, Denise's phone rang at 2 p.m. Unknown Houston number. Mrs. Collins? This is Kayla Martinez. The voice was confident, almost friendly. I hope you don't mind me calling directly. Denise's blood turned to ice, but her voice remained steady. Not at all. How can I help you? I wanted to give you a heads up about this weekend. Richard and I will be making an announcement at your charity event. I thought it would be courteous to let you know beforehand. The audacity was breathtaking. Richard's mistress was calling his wife to preview their public humiliation. How thoughtful, Denise replied, her tone silk over steel. I'll make sure everyone's listening. Kayla laughed, mistaking composure for defeat. I appreciate your understanding. This doesn't have to be ugly. Oh, honey, Denise said sweetly. I don't think you understand the situation at all, but you will soon. The call ended. Denise sat in her study, surrounded by legal documents, bank statements, and private investigator reports. 18 months of evidence. 15 years of marriage. A lifetime of family wealth Richard had spent on another woman. Saturday night couldn't come fast enough, because Kayla Martinez was about to learn the difference between confidence and preparation. And Richard Collins was about to discover that some foundations can't be shaken. They can only reveal which structures were built on solid ground and which were always destined to fall. Kayla thought moving to Atlanta would be her fairy tale ending. Instead, she walked into a chess game where she'd already been checkmated. Growing up in Houston's Fifth Ward, Kayla Martinez learned early that pretty girls had two choices: use their looks or get used by them. Her mother cleaned offices downtown while her father worked construction, both grinding through double shifts to keep food on the table and dreams alive. Education is your way out, her mother said every morning, braiding Kayla's hair before school. Beauty fades, Mija, but smart lasts forever. Kayla listened. She studied while other girls gossiped, worked part-time jobs while they dated, graduated valedictorian while they posted selfies. Texas A&M offered a partial scholarship for business, and she grabbed it with both hands. Construction management wasn't glamorous, but it paid well and opened doors. By 25, she was running job sites with crews of men twice her age. They respected her because she knew the difference between load-bearing walls and decorative facades, because she could read blueprints faster than they could wolf whistle. But respect didn't pay for the life she wanted. Houston's skyline glittered with possibility, but Kayla lived in a one-bedroom apartment with furniture from discount stores. She drove a reliable Toyota while contractors showed up in luxury trucks. Her bank account held enough for emergencies, but not enough for dreams. Then Richard Collins walked onto her construction site. She'd heard about him, of course. The Atlanta billionaire whose luxury hotels set new standards for elegance. His reputation preceded him like cologne. Expensive, impressive, impossible to ignore. When he stepped out of that black Mercedes wearing a suit that cost more than her rent, Kayla felt the familiar stirring of ambition mixed with attraction. Rich men were dangerous, but this one looked at her like she mattered. The business meeting stretched into dinner. Dinner became drinks. Drinks became conversation that felt more like confession. Richard spoke about building empires while feeling empty inside. Kayla shared dreams of starting her own development company while wondering if she'd ever afford the startup costs. When he walked her to the elevator, she made a decision that changed everything. Room 2012, she said, pressing the button. In case you want to continue this conversation. He followed. Their first night together was revelation and revolution. Richard made love like he'd built hotels, with attention to every detail, every sensation, every whispered desire. His hands were confident but gentle, his mouth talented in ways that made her forget every boyfriend who'd disappointed her. More importantly, he talked to her afterward. Not the quick exit of a man embarrassed by his actions, but genuine conversation about dreams and fears and the loneliness of success. My wife is a good woman, he said, stroking her hair in the darkness. But we've become strangers living in the same house. She has her charity work, I have my business. We're like roommates going through motions. Kayla should have stopped there, should have recognized the classic cheater's excuse. But Richard wasn't some middle-aged cliche looking for validation. He was brilliant, accomplished, genuinely unhappy in ways that money couldn't fix. "What would make you happy?" she asked. "Someone who gets excited about my successes instead of taking them for granted. Someone who wants to build something together instead of just managing what already exists." He meant her. She knew it, felt it in the way his arms tightened around her waist. The affair intensified over months. Richard flew to Houston twice a month, always on legitimate business, but staying longer than necessary. They explored the city together. Art galleries, restaurants, weekend trips to Dallas and San Antonio. He was generous without being patronizing. The apartment upgrade came with a suggestion, not a demand. The designer clothes appeared because he wanted to see her in beautiful things, not because he was trying to buy her affections. "You deserve the best," he said, watching her model a dress that cost more than her previous monthly salary. "You work harder than anyone I know. Why shouldn't you have nice things?" Because they came with strings she couldn't see yet. The gifts escalated gradually. Jewelry for special occasions. Weekend trips to cities she'd only dreamed of visiting. A credit card for emergency expenses that somehow covered everything she wanted. Kayla told herself she wasn't being bought. She was being appreciated by a man who understood her worth. Richard treated her like a queen, and she'd never experienced that kind of attention before. Her friends in Houston grew concerned. "Married men don't leave their wives," her roommate warned. "They just spend their wives' money on side pieces until they get bored." "Richard's different," Kayla insisted. "You don't know him like I do." But doubt crept in during the weeks between visits. Richard's texts were loving but vague. His phone calls were passionate but brief. He spoke about their future in terms that sounded promising but never included concrete plans. When would he file for divorce? When would they go public? When would she stop being a secret? "Soon," he always promised. "I just need to handle some business complications first." The complications stretched into months, then more than a year. Kayla's patience frayed like cheap fabric. She'd given up dating other men, turned down job opportunities in other cities, built her entire life around a relationship that existed only in hotel rooms and stolen weekends. She began researching Richard's marriage online. Social media showed a picture-perfect couple attending galas, hosting dinner parties, posing for charity photographs. Denise Collins looked elegant, confident, completely secure in her position as the billionaire's wife. But pictures lied. Richard had explained that their public appearances were performance, social obligations that meant nothing compared to what he felt for Kayla. "She married me for status," he said during one of their Houston weekends. "You love me for who I am. Have you ever wanted something so badly you ignored all the warning signs?" What happened when reality hit? Share your experience. The charity gala invitation arrived like fate delivered by mail. Richard would be the guest of honor. Atlanta's elite would gather to celebrate his generosity. Cameras would document everything. It was perfect timing for perfect revenge. Kayla booked her flight with trembling fingers, bought the red silk gown that would stop traffic, practiced her announcement in mirror reflections until every word sounded like destiny. She would walk into that ballroom and claim her place. No more secrets. No more hiding. No more waiting for Richard to find courage. She would provide for both of them. The night before leaving Houston, she Googled Denise Collins one final time. The search results made her hand shake. The woman she'd been dismissing as a trophy wife owned property across 3 states. Her family name appeared on historical societies, museum boards, university donor lists. But it was too late to back down now. The dress was packed. The flight was booked. The words were ready. Kayla Martinez was about to discover that fairy tales and real life followed very different rules. And the woman she was planning to replace had been writing the ending long before Kayla knew she was playing a part. When she called Denise 3 days before the gala, she thought she was being gracious, giving her rival advance notice of defeat. She had no idea she was walking into a trap that had been 18 months in the making. The morning of the gala, 3 people woke up believing they would win. Only one of them was right. Richard Collins stood in his marble shower at 6 a.m., hot water streaming down his shoulders as anxiety twisted his stomach into knots. The charity gala was supposed to be his triumph. Atlanta's business elite celebrating his generosity, cameras capturing his humanitarian spirit, headlines cementing his reputation as a man who gave back. Instead, he felt like a condemned man walking toward his execution. Kayla's phone call 3 days earlier had shaken him to his core. She was coming to Atlanta. She planned to make an announcement. She'd already bought her dress, booked her hotel, prepared her speech. "It's time, Richard," she'd said, her Texas accent thick with determination. "I'm tired of being your secret. Either we go public or we're done." He tried to talk her out of it, explained about timing, business implications, social complexities she didn't understand. But Kayla had made up her mind with the stubbornness that first attracted him to her. Now, stepping out of the shower, Richard caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror. 52 years old, silver hair still thick, body maintained by expensive trainers and strict diets. He looked successful, confident, in control. He felt like a fraud. 20 miles away, Kayla Martinez woke up in the Ritz-Carlton's executive suite, morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Atlanta's skyline. She'd barely slept, excitement and nerves fighting for control of her racing heart. Today was her day, her moment, her victory. The red silk gown hung in the closet like a battle flag. She'd spent 3 hours at Houston's most exclusive salon yesterday, ensuring every detail was perfect. Hair, nails, makeup. She looked like the kind of woman who belonged on Billionaire's arm. Because that's exactly what she was about to become. Kayla ordered room service and spread the morning newspapers across her bed. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution Society page featured a preview of the evening's gala, complete with photos of expected guests. Richard's picture dominated the coverage, handsome and distinguished in his tuxedo. Philanthropist Richard Collins will be honored tonight for his generous contributions to children's health care, the article read. The event, hosted at the Grand Ballroom of the Four Seasons, promises to be Atlanta's social event of the season. Perfect. Maximum audience for maximum impact. She'd rehearsed her speech 100 times. Short, sweet, impossible to ignore. The cameras would capture everything. Society reporters would scramble for quotes. And by midnight, everyone in Georgia would know that Richard Collins was in love with someone new. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend in Houston. "You sure about this, girl? Once you blow up his marriage, there's no going back." Kayla typed her response with steady fingers. Some things are worth the risk. Love is worth everything. But across town in the Buckhead mansion, Denise Collins was experiencing the calm that comes before calculated storms. She woke at her usual 7 a.m., made coffee in the kitchen where she'd planned her revenge, and reviewed the evening's timeline one final time. Every detail had been orchestrated with precision that would have impressed military strategists. Guest list: Atlanta's power players, state politicians, celebrity philanthropists, and every society reporter in the Southeast. Seating arrangement: Kayla would be placed at a table with perfect sight lines to the podium, but no direct access to Richard until the crucial moment. Media coverage: 3 television stations, 5 newspapers, and a dozen social media influencers with combined followers in the millions. The legal documents were ready. Asset transfers completed months ago. Bank accounts secured in her name alone. Richard's access to her family's money would end at midnight, regardless of what happened at the gala. Denise had learned patience from her parents, strategy from Uncle Marcus, and timing from 15 years of marriage to a man who thought he was smarter than everyone around him. She dressed carefully in midnight blue silk that complemented her eyes and made her skin glow. The pearls had belonged to her grandmother, old money jewelry that whispered rather than shouted. Her makeup was flawless but understated, her hair styled in elegant waves that would photograph beautifully. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who belonged in rooms where decisions were made and fortunes were built. When Richard came downstairs for breakfast, he found her reading the society page preview over coffee and croissants. "Big night tonight," she said without looking up from the newspaper. "Are you nervous about your speech?" "A little," he admitted, pouring himself coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "Public speaking still makes me anxious. You'll be wonderful. You always are when you're passionate about something." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Richard ate in silence, scrolling through his phone while Denise finished her coffee. His messages included a dozen texts from Kayla, excitement about seeing him tonight, reminders about their plan, heart emojis that made his stomach clench with dread. At noon, he received a call from his assistant about last-minute gala preparations. The podium microphone needed sound testing. The auction items required final arrangement. The media credentials needed approval. "Handle everything," he told her. "I don't want any surprises tonight." But surprises were already in motion, planned by a woman who understood that the best revenge was served in public with cameras rolling. Denise spent the afternoon at the hotel, supervising final details with the efficiency that had made her Uncle Marcus's favorite niece. She checked lighting, camera angles, sound systems. Every element that would broadcast Atlanta's most explosive social moment needed to be perfect. The hotel staff treated her with the deference reserved for women who signed checks without looking at amounts. She was gracious but firm, charming but uncompromising. Everything had to be exactly right. At 4 p.m., she received a text from her lawyer. "All documents filed. Your assets are completely protected. Whatever happens tonight, you're financially secure." Denise smiled and deleted the message. Patricia Hawkins had been worth every penny of her considerable fees. The afternoon stretched like held breath. Richard paced the mansion, alternately calling Kayla to beg her to reconsider and staring at his phone in paralyzed silence. Kayla spent hours getting ready, transforming herself into the vision of success she'd dreamed of becoming. Denise reviewed her plan one final time, ensuring every contingency was covered. By 5 p.m., all three were in their cars heading toward destiny. Richard's Mercedes crawled through Atlanta traffic while his mind raced through scenarios, none of them ending well. Kayla's taxi flew through the streets as she practiced her announcement, words that would change 3 lives forever. Denise's driver navigated carefully through the downtown crowds gathering for the year's biggest social event. When you know a relationship is ending, do you fight for it or let it go? What would you do if you were in Denise's position? Comment below. The grand ballroom doors opened at 6 p.m. Photographers gathered like vultures sensing carrion. Society reporters sharpened their pens for the evening's gossip. Television crews tested their equipment for what they expected to be routine charity coverage. None of them suspected they were about to witness Atlanta's most spectacular social explosion. As guests began arriving in designer gowns and custom tuxedos, 3 people prepared for the performance of their lives. Only one of them knew how the show would end. As Denise fastened her pearls in the mirror, she practiced the words that would end her marriage and save her dignity. In 2 hours, everyone would know the truth. The only question was, who will be left standing when the smoke cleared? The microphone was meant for charity auction announcements. Instead, it became the stage for the most expensive revelation in Atlanta's social history. The grand ballroom sparkled like a jewel box under crystal chandeliers. 500 guests in designer formal wear mingled beneath soaring ceilings adorned with fresh orchids and cascading silk. The auction tables displayed weekend getaways worth more than houses, artwork that belonged to museums, and experiences money couldn't usually buy. Richard Collins worked the room with practiced charm, shaking hands and accepting congratulations for his humanitarian efforts. His smile never wavered, but sweat beaded along his hairline despite the ballroom's perfect climate control. Every laugh felt forced, every conversation strained. He'd spotted Kayla the moment she entered. The red silk gown fit her like liquid fire, drawing stares from every man in the room and hostile glances from their wives. She moved with predatory grace between tables, accepting champagne from waiters and deflecting questions about her identity with mysterious smiles. She was beautiful, dangerous, and completely focused on her target. Denise glided through the crowd like she owned the building, which, technically, her family's money had helped finance years earlier. She greeted guests with warmth that felt genuine, discussed charity initiatives with passion that couldn't be faked, and posed for photographers with the ease of someone born to Atlanta's social spotlight. But her eyes never stopped tracking the two people whose actions would define the evening's outcome. The dinner proceeded according to schedule. Speeches praised generosity, while guests calculated tax deductions. The mayor presented Richard with a humanitarian award, calling him a shining example of success with conscience. Richard accepted the crystal trophy with steady hands and a speech about community responsibility. His voice carried clearly through the sound system, confident and commanding. Nobody watching would have suspected that his marriage was about to explode in front of 500 witnesses. The auction began at 9 p.m. Items sold for ridiculous amounts to people who considered money a scoring system rather than a necessity. A week in Tuscany went for $30,000. Wine cellar tours commanded $25,000. Art pieces sold for more than most people earned annually. The crowd was loose with champagne and generous with other people's money. Laughter echoed off marble walls. Cameras flashed like lightning. Everything was perfect for the evening's entertainment portion. That's when Kayla made her move. She rose from her table with liquid grace, red silk catching the light as she walked toward the podium. Conversations quieted as she passed. The auctioneer paused mid-sentence, confused by this uninvited interruption. Kayla reached for the microphone with steady hands and a radiant smile. "Good evening, Atlanta." Her voice carried across the silent ballroom, Texas accent adding honey to each word. "I know y'all weren't expecting to hear from me tonight." Richard's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. The humanitarian award slipped from his other hand, crystal shattering against marble floor like his carefully constructed public image. "My name is Kayla Martinez," she continued, her smile bright enough to power the chandeliers. "And I have an announcement that I think will interest everyone here." 500 people held their breath. Photographers sensed drama and raised their cameras. Television crews swung their equipment toward this unexpected speaker. "I'm moving into Richard Collins' beautiful Buckhead mansion tomorrow morning." The words dropped like bombs in church quiet air. He promised me half his space and all his time. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Gasps erupted from shocked guests. Wine glasses trembled in manicured hands. The mayor's wife actually dropped her purse, contents scattering across the floor. Security guards stepped forward, unsure whether this was part of the program or a crisis requiring intervention. Richard's face cycled through emotions like a broken slot machine: shock, panic, rage, and something that might have been relief. His secret was out. The decision had been taken from him. But Kayla wasn't finished. "Some of you might wonder why I'm telling you this publicly," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "It's because love shouldn't hide in shadows. It should stand in the light where everyone can see it." More gasps, frantic texting, society reporters scribbling notes like their lives depended on capturing every detail. "Richard Collins is the most generous, passionate, brilliant man I've ever known," Kayla continued. "And starting tomorrow, I'll be proud to call his house my home." That's when Denise moved. She rose from her table with the fluid grace of a dancer, every eye following her elegant progress toward the podium. Her midnight blue gown whispered against marble floors. Her pearls caught camera flashes like tears made of light. The ballroom fell silent as death. Denise reached the podium and gently took the microphone from Kayla's surprised hands. Her smile never wavered, warm as southern sunshine and twice as deadly. The silence stretched like a hell breath. 500 people waited for the wronged wife's breakdown, the tears and accusations that would complete their evening's entertainment. Instead, Denise spoke with the controlled precision of a woman who owned everything she surveyed. "Move in where, darling?" Her voice carried clearly through the sound system, sweet as honey poured over broken glass. "That house doesn't belong to him." The words hit like thunder. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The revelation hung in the air like smoke from an explosion, choking everyone in its radius. Then chaos erupted like a dam burst. Photographers surged forward, cameras flashing like strobe lights at a nightclub. Reporters began shouting questions over each other's voices. Guests pulled out phones, texting and calling and live streaming the disaster unfolding before their eyes. The mayor's security detail moved closer, sensing trouble that could reflect badly on city leadership. Hotel staff positioned themselves near exits, ready to manage whatever came next. Richard stood frozen at his table, the humanitarian award in pieces at his feet, watching 15 years of marriage and a lifetime of reputation crumble in real time. Kayla's confident smile cracked like cheap paint. Her eyes darted between Richard and Denise, finally understanding that she'd walked into something far more complex than a simple affair. But Denise remained calm at the center of the storm. She adjusted the microphone height with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to public speaking, someone who belonged on stages where important announcements were made. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. "I think it's time we talked about what really belongs to whom in this marriage. Have you ever witnessed someone's life change in an instant? How did it feel to watch? What would you have done? Tell me in the comments." The security team approached, but Denise waved them off with regal authority. She had something more to say, and everyone in the ballroom was going to hear it. She leaned closer to Kayla, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to the front tables through the room's perfect acoustics. "You have no idea who I am." Those 5 words would haunt Kayla Martinez for months to come, because as the cameras continued flashing and the whispers grew louder, it became clear that the evening's real entertainment was just beginning. As reporters rushed toward them, Denise took Kayla's arm with surprising gentleness. "Walk with me, dear," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let me show you something that might interest you about your new home." The legal documents Denise pulled from her purse didn't just prove ownership. They revealed a financial empire Richard never knew existed. The crowd pressed closer as Denise guided the stunned younger woman toward one of the auction tables. Hotel staff cleared wine glasses and dinner plates, making room for papers that would reshape Atlanta's understanding of power and money. Kayla's red silk gown rustled with each step, the confident stride she'd entered with now uncertain on designer heels. Her face had gone pale beneath perfectly applied makeup, but she held her chin high as cameras clicked around them like mechanical insects. "What are you doing?" Kayla whispered, her Texas accent thickened by stress. "Educating you," Denise replied calmly, opening her beaded purse with steady fingers. "You made some interesting assumptions about my husband's assets. Let me show you how wrong you were." The first document she placed on the white tablecloth was a property deed. Official stamps and signatures covered the heavy paper like medals of ownership. The Buckhead Mansion's address was clearly visible, along with a legal description of 12 acres of prime Atlanta real estate. "This is the deed to the house you plan to move into tomorrow," Denise announced, her voice carrying to nearby tables where guests leaned forward to listen. "As you can see, it bears only my name." Kayla's eyes scanned the document, confusion deepening with each line. The property had been purchased in 2009, 2 years after her affair with Richard began. The buyer was listed as Denise Matthews Collins, with no mention of Richard's name anywhere on the legal paperwork. "That's impossible," Kayla said, loud enough for reporters to hear. "Richard bought that house with his construction money." Denise's laugh was musical, completely without malice. "Oh, honey, Richard's construction company was nearly bankrupt when we bought this house. The down payment came from property I sold in South Carolina. Family land that's been in my name since before I met my husband." She placed a second document on the table. Bank records showing a wire transfer of $800,000 from a Charleston account bearing only Denise's name. The transfer date matched the property purchase exactly. Gasps rippled through the watching crowd. Society reporters scribbled frantically, recognizing the story that would dominate headlines for weeks. "But that's not all," Denise continued, her voice gaining strength with each revelation. "Let me show you what else Richard promised you that he doesn't actually own." More documents appeared like cards in a deadly poker game. Property deeds for 3 South Carolina rental properties. Investment accounts opened before the Collins marriage. Trust funds established by Uncle Marcus when Denise was 25 years old. Each paper told the same story. wealth that predated Richard, assets he'd never controlled, money that belonged to his wife's family for generations. Richard finally found his voice from across the ballroom. "Denise, stop this," he called out, pushing through the crowd toward the table. His face was flushed red with embarrassment and rage. "This is between us. Don't drag everyone else into our private business." "Private?" Denise turned toward him with raised eyebrows. "Your girlfriend just announced her intention to move into my house in front of 500 people. I'd say privacy ended about 10 minutes ago." The crowd parted as Richard approached, guests stepping back to give the drama room to unfold. Television cameras followed his movement, while photographers captured every expression on his increasingly desperate face. "The house has both our names on it," he said, grasping for any thread of dignity. "We bought it together as a married couple." "Actually, we didn't." Denise's voice remained maddeningly calm. She placed another document on the table, the original purchase agreement. "I bought the house using money from my inheritance. You signed the papers, but you never contributed a single dollar to the purchase price." Kayla stared at the documents spread before her like evidence in a criminal trial. Each page revealed another layer of deception, another assumption that had crumbled under scrutiny. "What about his business?" she demanded, desperation creeping in her voice. "Richard built a construction empire. Hotels across 3 states. That's his money. Built with what startup capital?" Denise asked gently. "His company was failing in 2010. I liquidated coastal property worth $2 million to keep it afloat. The business success you admire? It exists because of my family's money." She produced more bank records, loan documents, corporate filings that painted a picture of financial dependence Richard had hidden from everyone, including himself. The ballroom had gone completely silent except for camera clicks and the scratch of reporters' pens. 500 people watched Atlanta's most powerful couple destroy each other with spreadsheets and legal papers. Richard's shoulders sagged as the truth settled over the room like toxic fog. His humanitarian award lay in crystal pieces at his feet. His reputation was bleeding out in front of cameras that would broadcast his humiliation across the Southeast. But Kayla wasn't finished fighting. "None of this changes anything," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "Richard loves me. He chose me. Whatever arrangements you have about money, he made his feelings clear." "Did he?" Denise asked. "Let me ask you something, dear. In 2 years of whatever this relationship is, has Richard ever filed for divorce? Has he ever moved out of my house? Has he ever introduced you to his friends or family?" Kayla's silence answered more clearly than words. What's more powerful, money or dignity? When someone betrays your trust, do you expose them publicly or handle it privately? Share your philosophy. Denise gathered the documents with careful precision, each paper a nail in the coffin of Richard's public image. But she wasn't done yet. "There's something else you should know about your boyfriend," she said, reaching into her purse one final time. "You weren't his first affair. You weren't even his second." The folder she placed on the table was thick with private investigator reports, photographs, hotel receipts dating back years before Kayla entered the picture. A pattern of infidelity that painted Richard as a serial cheater rather than a man genuinely in love. Richard lunged forward, trying to grab the folder, but hotel security stepped between him and the table. The mayor had signaled for intervention before the situation escalated beyond social scandal into physical confrontation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the hotel manager's voice came through the sound system. "We're going to take a brief intermission to resolve this situation." But the damage was complete. Cameras had captured everything. Reporters had documented every revelation. Social media was already exploding with photos and videos of Atlanta's most spectacular marriage implosion. When the dust settled and the guests began filing toward the exits, 3 people remained standing at the auction table. Denise held all the cards. Richard had lost everything he thought he owned. And Kayla? She was about to make a choice that would surprise them all. The morning after the gala, Atlanta's elite woke up to headlines they never expected, and 3 people whose lives would never be the same. Billionaire's wife owns everything screamed the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's front page, complete with photos for the previous night's disaster. The article detailed Denise's financial revelations with the thoroughness of investigative journalism, backed by documents she provided to reporters after the hotel cleared the ballroom. Social media exploded overnight. Hashtag Buckheadgate trended nationally as videos of the confrontation spread across platforms. TikTok users dissected every moment frame by frame. Instagram influencers posted lengthy analyses of body language and fashion choices. Twitter became a battlefield between Team Denise supporters and Team Gala sympathizers. The coverage painted three very different pictures of the scandal's main players. Richard emerged as the villain, a wealthy man who'd built his empire on his wife's inheritance while carrying on affairs with younger women. Business reporters dug into his company's financial history, confirming Denise's claims about the loans that saved his construction business. Former employees came forward with stories about his pattern of inappropriate behavior with female contractors. Gala became the tragic figure, a hardworking woman from Houston who'd been deceived about her lover's true circumstances. Her social media accounts gained thousands of followers overnight, with supporters praising her courage for confronting the situation publicly. But critics labeled her a homewrecker who got hurt just for rewards. Denise was portrayed as the wronged wife who'd orchestrated perfect revenge. Society columnists praised her strategic thinking while questioning the ethics of such public humiliation. Financial analysts marveled at her business acumen, noting that she protected her assets while exposing her husband's dependence on family money. But the headlines couldn't capture the emotional aftermath, devastating all three lives. Richard woke up in the Four Seasons Hotel where he'd fled after the gala, unable to face returning to a mansion that no longer felt like home. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, business associates, and board members demanding explanations. His assistant had already fielded dozens of interview requests and 3 separate offers for television exclusives. He ignored them all, staring at the ceiling while his life collapsed in real time. The construction company's stock price had dropped 12% in overnight trading. 2 major hotel projects faced review as investors questioned his financial stability. The Children's Hospital Board had issued a statement re-evaluating their relationship with such a controversial figure. 15 years of marriage, 20 years of business building, a lifetime of reputation, all destroyed in one evening by documents he'd never bothered to read carefully. 20 floors above him in the same hotel, Gala sat by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Atlanta's skyline. The red silk gown hung in the closet like a costume from a play that ended badly. Room service trays sat untouched on the dining table while she scrolled through news coverage of her public humiliation. The worst part wasn't the embarrassment or the headlines. It was the growing realization that she'd been played by a master manipulator who'd told her exactly what she needed to hear. Her phone rang constantly with calls from Houston friends, family members who'd seen the news, reporters wanting her side of the story. She let everything go to voicemail while trying to process how thoroughly she'd misunderstood the situation. Richard wasn't the self-made billionaire she'd fallen in love with. He was a man living off his wife's money while convincing other women he was successful enough to take care of them. Every expensive dinner, every luxury hotel room, every designer gift had been purchased with funds that belonged to the woman he was betraying. The humiliation burned worse than heartbreak. But 30 miles away in the Buckhead mansion, Denise discovered that victory tasted more bitter than expected. She walked through rooms that echoed with 15 years of shared memories, good ones mixed with recent betrayals. The master bedroom where she trusted Richard completely. The kitchen where they'd planned their future together. The study where she discovered his pattern of affairs. Everything looked the same, but the emotional landscape had changed forever. Her phone showed hundreds of missed calls and thousands of social media notifications. Reporters camped outside the front gate. Television crews broadcast live updates from her driveway. The private investigator who documented Richard's affairs had already been contacted by 3 publishing companies interested in a tell-all book. Patricia Hawkins, her lawyer, arrived at noon with legal documents Richard needed to sign. "You've accomplished what you set out to do," Patricia said, settling into the living room where Denise served coffee with steady hands. "Your assets are completely protected. His access to your accounts ended at midnight. Financially, you're completely independent. And emotionally?" Denise asked. "That's above my pay grade. But speaking as someone who's watched a lot of marriages end badly, you handled this better than most." He can't claim ignorance about the financial arrangements. Everything was documented in your prenup. The prenuptial agreement Richard had signed eagerly 15 years earlier, too in love to read the fine print that protected Denise's inherited wealth from community property laws. What happens next? He'll probably file for divorce within the week. Standard irreconcilable differences. You'll keep everything that was yours before the marriage, plus whatever appreciation those assets gained during your time together. He'll keep his construction company and whatever cash reserves it has, which isn't much considering how much he spent on affairs. Patricia's smile was sharp as broken glass. Not your problem anymore. But Denise felt hollow rather than triumphant. She'd won the battle completely. Reputation intact, finances secured, revenge served publicly. So why did success feel so empty? The doorbell rang at 3 p.m. Security cameras showed an unexpected visitor. Kayla Martinez, still in Atlanta, standing at the front gate with shoulders squared and chin raised. When you discover someone isn't who you thought they were, how do you process the betrayal? Have you ever had to completely reevaluate a relationship? Como olvido? Denise almost ignored the request for entry. She'd said everything that needed saying the previous night. But curiosity won over caution as she buzzed open the gate. Kayla walked up the circular driveway like she was approaching her own execution. Gone was the confident stride from the Gala. Her designer clothes from the night before had been replaced with simple jeans and a white blouse. No makeup covered the exhaustion in her dark eyes. "I know you don't owe me anything," Kayla said when Denise opened the front door. "But I need to understand what really happened, not the version in the newspapers. The truth." Denise studied the younger woman for a long moment. Yesterday, Kayla had been the enemy, the homewrecker trying to steal 15 years of marriage. Today, she looked like what she actually was, another woman Richard had deceived. "Come in," Denise said finally. "I think we have more to talk about than either of us realized." As they walked into the living room where Denise had planned her revenge, neither woman suspected they were about to discover something that would surprise them both. The enemy of your enemy might not be your friend, but she could be your strongest ally. Sometimes the person you think is your enemy turns out to be the only one who really understands what you're fighting for. 3 days after the gala that shattered Atlanta's social scene, Kayla sat across from Denise in a downtown coffee shop that neither woman would have chosen under normal circumstances. The morning rush swirled around them, but their corner table felt like an island of tension in a sea of ordinary lives. "You could have destroyed me completely," Kayla said, her fingers wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched. "Why didn't you?" Denise studied the younger woman's face. Gone was the confident mistress from the gala. In her place sat someone who looked as hollowed out as Denise felt. "Because destroying you wouldn't have given me back the last 3 years of my life." The legal papers between them told a story neither woman had expected. Richard's attempts to manipulate the situation had backfired spectacularly. His lawyer had advised him to pit them against each other, to let their anger fuel a battle that would distract from his own failures. Instead, both women had done something he never anticipated. They'd started talking. "He promised me you didn't care about him anymore," Kayla whispered. "Said you were only staying for appearances." "He told me you were just a passing phase," Denise replied. "Said you didn't mean anything real to him." They sat with that knowledge between them like a third presence at the table. Richard had painted each woman as the villain in the other's story, never imagining they might compare notes. Kayla's phone buzzed. Another text from Richard, the 15th that morning. She declined the call without looking at it. "He's been calling since the story broke. Says he can explain everything. Can he explain why he moved $50,000 from our joint account to pay for your apartment deposit?" Denise asked, sliding a bank statement across the table. Kayla's face went white. He said that money was from his business accounts. It was from a fund I set up for my nephew's college tuition. The revelation hung between them like smoke from a fire they were both still trying to put out. Denise watched understanding dawn in Kayla's eyes, the same understanding she'd had when she first realized how deep Richard's deceptions ran. "There's more," Denise continued. "The private investigator I hired found some interesting things. Richard wasn't just hiding money from me. He was hiding it from the IRS." Kayla leaned back in her chair, as if the words had physical weight. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we might both be victims of the same man's lies." The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too normal for the conversation they were having. Denise pulled out a folder she'd been carrying like armor for 3 days. "This isn't about you and me anymore," she said. "This is about a man who built his entire life on other people's trust and then sold that trust piece by piece." Inside the folder were photographs, bank statements, and emails that painted a picture neither woman had fully seen before. Richard's pattern wasn't just infidelity. It was systematic manipulation on a scale that made their personal pain look like practice runs for something bigger. "The woman before you was named Sarah," Denise said quietly. "Before her, there was Maria, and before Maria, there was Jennifer. All of them thought they were special. All of them thought I didn't understand him the way they did." Kayla's hand shook as she looked through the papers. Each document was another crack in the foundation of everything she believed about her relationship with Richard. "He used the same lines with all of us," Denise continued. "The same promises, the same explanations for why he couldn't leave his marriage right away. Even the same restaurant for first dates." The younger woman looked up from the papers, and for the first time since they'd met, Denise saw something besides defiance in her eyes. She saw recognition. "The place with the private dining rooms downtown," Kayla said slowly. "Table 7. He always requests table 7. They looked at each other across the small table, and something shifted. The anger that had defined their relationship began transforming into something else. Not friendship exactly, but understanding. "So what do we do now?" Kayla asked. Denise had been asking herself the same question for 72 hours. Every legal expert she'd consulted said the same thing. Richard's financial games had put them both at risk. His debts could reach back to assets that Kayla had never touched and properties that Denise had owned before they'd ever met. "We protect ourselves," Denise said. "Together." The word felt strange coming out her mouth. 3 days ago, she wanted Kayla gone from her life forever. Now she was suggesting they work as allies against the man who'd lied to them both. "Richard's lawyer called me yesterday," Kayla said. "Wanted to know if I'd be willing to sign papers saying I never received any gifts or money from him." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I needed time to think." Denise smiled for the first time since the gala. "Good. Don't sign anything until we figure out exactly what we're dealing with." As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Kayla hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "That night at the gala, when you whispered in my ear, what did you really mean when you said I had no idea who you were?" Denise gathered the papers back into their folder, taking her time with the answer. "I meant that you've been so focused on taking what you thought was mine, you never bothered to find out what I was actually capable of protecting." 3 hours later, they walked out of the coffee shop together. Not as friends, but not as enemies either. They were two women who discovered they'd been fighting the wrong battle against the wrong person. Richard's next move would determine everything. But for the first time in 3 years, he wouldn't be making it against divided opponents. The man they both thought they knew turned out to be a stranger, with secrets that went deeper than either woman imagined. The private investigator's office smelled like old coffee and broken promises. Jack Morrison had spent 20 years uncovering other people's secrets, but even he seemed unsettled by what he'd found about Richard Collins. "Ladies, I've got to be honest with you," he said, spreading files across his desk like dealing cards in a game nobody wanted to play. "In 2 decades of doing this work, I've never seen anything quite like what your husband was running." Denise and Kayla sat side by side in chairs that had probably witnessed 1,000 other revelations. 3 days of working together had created an unlikely partnership neither had expected. "Start with what we know for sure," Denise said. Morrison opened the first file. "Richard Collins has been married 4 times. You, Mrs. Collins, are wife number 4. But here's the thing. He never actually divorced wife number 2. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Kayla grabbed Denise's arm without thinking, a gesture that would have been impossible a week ago. That means my marriage isn't legal? Denise asked. It means Richard's got bigger problems than adultery, Morrison replied. Bigamy is a federal crime. The revelation rewrote everything they thought they understood. Richard hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd been living multiple lives with multiple identities across multiple states. Wife number 2 is named Patricia Chun. Morrison continued. Lives in Dallas. Has no idea Richard married anyone else. As far as she knows, he travels for business and comes home every few months. Kayla felt sick. How many women are there that we found so far? 7 active relationships across 5 states. 3 marriages, 2 common law situations, and 2 women who think they're engaged to marry him next year. The scope of Richard's deceptions was breathtaking. Each woman had been carefully selected and managed, their lives compartmentalized, so they never overlapped. He created a network of relationships built on lies so complex that even Morrison's team was still untangling them. The financial piece is even worse, Morrison said, opening another file. Richard's been using each woman's credit and assets to fund the relationships with the others. The apartment he rented for you, Miss Brooks, was paid for with money he took from his wife in Phoenix. His wife in Phoenix? Denise's voice was barely above a whisper. Marriage number 3. Never divorced her either. The room spun around them. Everything they'd fought over, the house, the money, the status, had been built on foundations that didn't exist. Richard wasn't a successful businessman with relationship problems. He was a career criminal who used romance as his weapon. There's more, Morrison said. The IRS has been investigating him for 3 years. Tax evasion, identity theft, fraud. They've been building a case, waiting for the right moment to move. Denise thought about all the business trips, the unexplained absences, the phone calls he took in private. She'd attributed it to an affair, never imagining it was evidence of a completely fabricated life. What about his business? Kayla asked. The consulting company? Morrison pulled out another stack of papers. Doesn't exist. Never has. The office address is a mail forwarding service. The business license is fake. The clients he talks about are either made up or companies he did single projects for years ago. The magnitude of the deception was staggering. Richard had constructed an entire false reality, complete with fake business cards, fabricated income statements, and forged documents. He'd lived like a man with millions while surviving entirely on money stolen from the women who trusted him. How long has this been going on? Denise asked. Best we can tell, about 15 years. Started small, dating women for their money, moving on when they got suspicious. But somewhere along the way, he got more ambitious. Started the multiple marriage scheme about 8 years ago. Kayla was crying now, not from heartbreak, but from the sheer horror of realizing how completely she'd been played. Every intimate moment, every promise, every declaration of love had been part of a calculated game she'd never known she was playing. The FBI wants to talk to both of you, Morrison continued. They need statements about the money he took, the lies he told, the documents he might have forged. You're both witnesses now, not just victims. Denise felt something she hadn't experienced in months: clarity. The guilt she'd carried about destroying her marriage evaporated. There had never been a real marriage to destroy. When do they want to meet? She asked. Tomorrow morning. There's something else, though. Morrison hesitated. They think he might run. His pattern when things get complicated is to disappear and start over somewhere else with a new identity. The thought of Richard escaping consequences for what he'd done to so many women ignited something fierce in Denise's chest. She looked at Kayla and saw the same fire reflected back. What can we do to stop him? Kayla asked. Morrison smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Work together. Share information. Don't let him pit you against each other the way he's been doing to everyone else for 15 years. As they left the investigator's office, Denise and Kayla walked in silence for several blocks. The Atlanta afternoon felt different somehow, as if the air itself had changed composition. I keep thinking about all the times he made me feel guilty for not trusting him, Kayla finally said. He told me I was paranoid, Denise replied. Said my suspicions were destroying our relationship. They'd both been gaslit by a master manipulator who'd turned their reasonable questions into evidence of their own inadequacy. The realization was as liberating as it was horrifying. Tomorrow they would talk to federal agents. Tonight, they would prepare to help bring down the man who'd stolen pieces of their souls while convincing them they were the problem. When the handcuffs clicked around Richard's wrists, two women who had been enemies discovered they were actually survivors of the same man's lies. The arrest happened at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning in the parking lot of the hotel where Richard thought he was meeting his lawyer. Instead, he found FBI agents waiting by his car with a warrant that detailed 15 years of fraud, bigamy, and identity theft. Denise watched it happen from across the street, sitting in her car with Kayla beside her. They'd been asked to stay away, but neither woman could resist witnessing the moment when Richard's carefully constructed world finally collapsed completely. He looked smaller somehow, Kayla said as they watched him being led away. She was right. Without his expensive suits and confident posture, Richard looked like what he'd always been underneath. A middle-aged man who'd built his entire identity on other people's trust and money. The investigation that followed revealed depths of deception that shocked even the federal agents. Richard had stolen over $2 million from various women across 7 states. He'd forged documents, filed false tax returns, and created fake businesses to launder money through a network of accounts that spanned multiple banks. But the most devastating revelation came when they found his notebooks. He kept detailed records of all of you. Agent Sarah Martinez explained during one of their interviews. Names, addresses, financial information, personal details he could use to manipulate you. He rated each woman on her usefulness and gullibility. Denise had scored an 8 out of 10 for financial assets, but only a 4 for emotional vulnerability. Kayla had gotten a 9 for vulnerability, but only a 6 for long-term financial potential. The clinical way he'd assessed their worth as human beings was more painful than any infidelity. The notebooks also revealed something else: Richard's complete lack of genuine feeling for any of them. His romantic declarations, his passionate moments, his promises for the future had all been performances calculated to achieve specific goals. There had never been any real love, only strategic manipulation. "I want to see them," Kayla said when Agent Martinez mentioned the other victims. "That's not typically how we handle these cases," the agent replied. "This isn't a typical case," Denise interjected. "If there are other women who went through what we did, maybe we can help each other heal." The victim meeting took place in a conference room at the FBI's Atlanta office 2 weeks later. 7 women, ranging in age from 28 to 54, sat around a table sharing stories that were frighteningly similar despite spanning different states and time periods. Patricia from Dallas had been married to Richard for 6 years and had no idea about any of the others. She'd spent her retirement savings supporting what she thought was his struggling business. Maria from Phoenix had refinanced her house to pay for Richard's medical emergency that never happened. Jennifer from Charlotte had signed over power of attorney, allowing Richard to drain her investment accounts while she recovered from surgery. Each story revealed the same pattern. Richard identified successful, independent women going through vulnerable periods in their lives, then systematically isolated them from friends and family while extracting every resource they had to offer. "He told me I was different from other women," said Susan, a pediatric nurse from Tennessee. "Said I understood him in ways no one else ever had. He used the exact same line with me," Kayla replied, word for word. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, 7 strangers had become a support network bonded by shared trauma and determination to see justice done. They exchanged contact information and made plans to stay in touch throughout Richard's trial. But the real transformation happened in the weeks that followed. Denise found herself channeling her anger into action. She hired the best lawyers she could find to help the other victims recover their stolen assets. She worked with financial advisors to untangle the complex web of accounts Richard had used to launder money. Most importantly, she began speaking publicly about the experience. Fraud doesn't just steal your money, she told a conference of women business owners in Miami. It steals your ability to trust yourself. The hardest part wasn't losing the house or the investments. It was learning to believe in my own judgment again. Kayla discovered she had a gift for helping other victims navigate the emotional aftermath of systematic deception. She started a support group that met twice a month in a community center near downtown Atlanta. Women who'd been manipulated by romantic fraudsters found a safe space to share their experiences without judgment. I spent 2 years thinking I was stupid for falling for his lies, one group member shared. But listening to all of you, I realized I wasn't stupid. I was human. And he was a predator who specialized in hunting decent people. The legal proceedings took 8 months. Richard pleaded guilty to avoid a trial that would have exposed even more victims and more crimes. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to all the women he defrauded. The day of his sentencing, Denise and Kayla sat together in the courtroom gallery. When the judge asked if any victims wanted to make impact statements, both women stood up. Richard Collins stole more than money from us, Denise told the court. He stole our ability to trust, to love openly, to believe in our own worth. But what he didn't count on was our ability to rebuild those things stronger than they were before. Kayla's statement was shorter but equally powerful. He thought he could use our hearts against us. Instead, he taught us how strong our hearts really are. As they walked out of the courthouse together, Denise felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year. Peace. Not the peace of revenge satisfied, but the deeper peace of truth acknowledged and justice served. Richard's reign of manipulation was over, but the lives he'd tried to destroy were just beginning to flourish in ways he could never have imagined. What started as revenge transformed into something neither woman expected, a business partnership that turned their pain into power. 6 months after Richard's sentencing, Denise stood in the skeleton of what would become the Collins Foundation for Financial Recovery. The building had once housed a failed restaurant, but she could see its potential. Open spaces perfect for support group meetings, offices for financial counselors, and a conference center where survivors could share their stories with others who needed to hear them. The contractor says we'll be ready to open in 3 months, Kayla said, joining her in the empty space. The state approved our nonprofit status yesterday. Their partnership had surprised everyone, including themselves. What had started as a shared need for justice had evolved into a shared vision for preventing others from experiencing what they'd been through. The Collins Foundation would provide free financial counseling, legal assistance, and emotional support for victims of romantic fraud. I never thought I'd be grateful for what Richard put us through, Denise said, running her hand along the wall where motivational quotes would soon hang. But if we can help even one woman avoid what we went through, maybe it was worth something. The foundation had grown from a simple idea into a comprehensive program. They partnered with local banks to provide financial literacy courses. Law schools were supplying volunteer attorneys to help victims untangle complex financial fraud. Therapists donated time to help survivors rebuild their emotional confidence. But the most powerful element was the peer support network. Women who'd survived romantic fraud had an understanding that no textbook could teach. They could spot the warning signs, recognize the manipulation tactics, and provide the specific type of encouragement that came from having walked the same painful path. Maria called yesterday, Kayla said. She wanted to know if we needed help with the Phoenix satellite office. Maria from Phoenix had become one of their most dedicated volunteers. After recovering most of her stolen retirement funds through the restitution process, she decided to dedicate her time to helping other survivors. She wasn't the only one. Patricia from Dallas was working with Texas authorities to strengthen laws around romantic fraud. Jennifer from Charlotte had started a blog that helped women recognize financial manipulation in relationships. The ripple effects of their collective healing were spreading far beyond what any of them had imagined. I have news, Denise said, pulling an envelope from her purse. Remember the property in South Carolina that Richard tried to steal from my family trust? The one the FBI helped you recover? The one that's now worth 3 times what it was when he tried to take it. I want to donate the proceeds to the foundation. Kayla stared at her. Denise, that's over $500,000. Money that should have been stolen from my family. Instead, it's going to help protect other families. The donation would allow them to expand faster than they'd ever dreamed. Instead of starting with one location in Atlanta, they could open centers in 3 cities simultaneously. They could hire professional staff instead of relying entirely on volunteers. They could create an online platform to help victims who didn't have local resources. There's something else, Denise continued. I've been thinking about the house. The Buckhead mansion had been a symbol of everything wrong with her marriage to Richard. Even though it had always been legally hers, it felt tainted by his presence and his lies. She'd been living there alone for months, rattling around in rooms that held too many painful memories. I want to turn it into a residential facility, she said. A place where women who've lost everything to fraud can stay while they rebuild their lives. The idea was ambitious, but perfect. The mansion had 12 bedrooms, multiple common areas, and extensive grounds that could provide a peaceful environment for healing. Women who'd been forced to sell their homes to pay debts their partners had secretly accumulated could have a safe place to recover financially and emotionally. We could house 20 women at a time, Denise continued, her excitement building. Provide them with financial counseling, job placement services, legal assistance, everything they need to start over. Kayla was quiet for a long moment, looking around the empty foundation building and imagining the expanded vision Denise was describing. You know what this means, don't you? She finally said. What? Richard thought he was taking your house away from you. Instead, he's going to be responsible for providing homes for dozens of women he could never touch. The irony was perfect. The mansion Richard had tried to claim through manipulation would become a sanctuary for women recovering from exactly the kind of manipulation he'd specialized in. Their personal healing had taken different paths. Denise had begun dating again, carefully, but with an openness that surprised her. Her new relationship was built on transparency and mutual respect, 2 things she'd thought she'd had with Richard, but had actually never experienced. Kayla had taken longer to trust again, but she'd found fulfillment in ways that didn't depend on romantic relationships. Her work with fraud survivors had revealed a natural talent for counseling and advocacy. She was considering going back to school for a degree in social work. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd fought each other instead of working together? Kayla asked. Denise considered the question. Richard would probably be out of prison in 5 years instead of 12. We'd both still be isolated and angry. The other women would never have gotten their money back. And none of this would exist, Kayla added, gesturing around the future foundation space. They'd turned their worst experience into their greatest purpose. The pain Richard had caused hadn't disappeared, but it had been transformed into something that could prevent others from experiencing the same suffering. I need to tell you something, Denise said. When I first met you, I hated everything about you. Your confidence, your youth, the way you looked at Richard like he was worth fighting for. I hated you too, Kayla replied. Your elegance, your success, the way you seemed to have everything I wanted. We were both wrong about what was worth fighting for. And we were both wrong about each other. As they locked up the building and walked to their cars, Denise felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with purpose. Richard had tried to destroy 2 strong women by turning them against each other. Instead, he'd created an alliance that would protect countless others from predators like him. The house Richard had tried to steal would shelter women he'd try to break. The pain he'd caused would become the foundation for healing he could never stop. They'd built something he could never touch, never manipulate, never destroy. They'd built something real. 2 years after the gala that changed everything, 3 people met again, but this time, power had found its rightful place. The annual Collins Foundation Gala filled the same Atlanta ballroom where Denise's marriage had ended and her real life had begun. But tonight, instead of charity auction paddles and awkward small talk, the room buzzed with genuine purpose and celebration. 237 women, Kayla announced from the podium, where she'd once tried to claim Richard's empire. That's how many survivors we've helped in our first 18 months of operation. The applause was different from the polite clapping that had filled this room 2 years ago. This crowd understood the weight of those numbers. Each one represented a life rebuilt, a future reclaimed, a woman who would never again fall victim to the kind of systematic manipulation Richard had perfected. Denise watched from the back of the room, no longer needing to be the center of attention to feel powerful. The foundation had grown beyond her wildest expectations. They now had offices in 6 cities, a national hotline, and partnerships with law enforcement agencies across the country. Most importantly, they'd helped change legislation in 4 states to strengthen penalties for romantic fraud. Our residential program has housed 83 women, Kayla continued. The average stay is 6 months. The success rate for financial independence after graduation is 92%. The Buckhead mansion had been transformed into something beautiful. Where Richard had once brought his mistresses to flaunt his borrowed wealth, women now came to rebuild lives he'd helped destroy. The master bedroom, where he'd made false promises, had become a counseling center. The dining room, where he'd entertained with stolen money, now hosted support group meetings. Every corner of the house that had once represented his deception now served his victims' recovery. But tonight held a surprise none of them had expected. "Excuse me." The voice came from near the ballroom entrance, cutting through the applause following Kayla's speech. "I was hoping I could speak with Ms. Collins and Ms. Brooks." Denise turned to see a man in his 50s, well-dressed but nervous, holding a manila envelope with the careful grip of someone carrying something precious. "I'm David Chun," he said as Denise and Kayla approached. "Patricia Chen's brother." Patricia, Richard's second wife, the one in Dallas who'd never known about the others. She'd recovered most of her stolen retirement funds, but had struggled emotionally with the betrayal more than some of the other survivors. "Is Patricia okay?" Kayla asked immediately. "She's better than okay," David replied. "That's why I'm here. She wanted me to give you this." The envelope contained a check for $50,000 and a letter written in Patricia's careful handwriting. "Dear Denise and Kayla," the letter began. 2 years ago, I thought my life was over. Richard had stolen my retirement, my trust, and my belief that I deserved love. But watching what you've both built from the ashes of his destruction has taught me something important. We get to decide what our pain becomes. The letter went on to describe Patricia's recovery. She'd started her own small business helping seniors protect themselves from financial fraud. She'd remarried, a widower she'd met in a grief support group, someone who understood loss and valued honesty. Most importantly, she'd found peace. "This donation comes from the profit of my first year in business," the letter continued. "Money I earned helping people protect themselves from men like Richard. I wanted to help other women discover what I learned. We are so much stronger than the people who try to break us." Denise had to step outside the ballroom to compose herself. The letter represented everything she'd hoped the foundation might accomplish, not just helping women survive fraud, but helping them thrive beyond it. Kayla joined her on the terrace where Atlanta's skyline glittered like diamonds against black velvet. "Do you think he knows?" Kayla asked. "About all of this?" They'd received word that Richard was serving his sentence in a federal facility in Texas. He'd lost appeals to reduce his sentence and wouldn't be eligible for parole for another 8 years. More importantly, he'd lost the power to manipulate anyone's life ever again. "I hope he does," Denise replied. "I hope he knows that everything he tried to destroy became stronger than he ever was." The foundation's success had attracted national attention. They'd been featured in magazines, invited to speak at conferences, and consulted by lawmakers writing stronger fraud protection legislation. But the recognition that mattered most came from the women they'd helped. "Ms. Brooks?" A young woman approached hesitantly. "I wanted to thank you. I was in your Phoenix support group last year after my boyfriend stole my identity to open credit cards." "How are you doing now?" Kayla asked. "I bought my first house, with my own money, in my own name. I never thought I'd be able to trust myself to make big decisions again, but your group taught me the difference between being careful and being afraid. These conversations happened at every foundation event. Women who'd arrived broken and ashamed, leaving confident and empowered. The transformation never got old, never became routine. Each success story was a small victory against the Richard Collinses of the world. As the evening wound down, Denise and Kayla found themselves alone in the ballroom where their unlikely partnership had begun. "Do you ever miss it?" Kayla asked. "The simplicity of just hating each other." Denise laughed. "Never. But I sometimes wonder what we would have become if we'd met under different circumstances." "We probably would have been friends from the beginning," Kayla replied. "We have more in common than either of us realized." They were both strong women who'd been temporarily derailed by a master manipulator. They were both survivors who'd chosen to transform their pain into purpose. Most importantly, they were both proof that the worst thing that happens to you doesn't have to define what happens next. "Ready to go home?" Denise asked. "Which home?" Kayla smiled. "I still can't believe I live in that mansion now." Kayla had moved into the residential facility as its live-in director, occupying the wing that had once been Richard's home office. The irony was perfect. Where he'd once planned his deceptions, she now planned other women's recoveries. As they left the ballroom together, Denise felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a life aligned with purpose. Richard had thought he was taking everything from her. Instead, he'd shown her what she was truly capable of building. The mansion where lies once lived became the home where truth transformed lives, including their own. 3 years after the charity gala that ended one life and began another, Denise stood in her wedding dress for the second time. But everything about this moment was different from her first marriage. This ceremony would be held in the garden behind the mansion, surrounded by women who'd become family through shared healing rather than shared deception. "You look beautiful," Kayla said, adjusting the simple pearl necklace Denise had chosen instead of the elaborate diamonds Richard had once insisted she wear. The groom waiting in the garden was nothing like Richard. James Martinez was a retired FBI agent who'd worked on financial fraud cases for 20 years before joining the foundation as their security consultant. He'd seen Denise at her strongest and most vulnerable, had watched her transform pain into purpose, and had fallen in love with her character rather than her assets. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on conversations about justice and healing rather than passion and promises. James had been married before, had lost his wife to cancer, and understood that love in middle age looked different from youthful romance. It was steadier, more honest, less desperate. "Are you nervous?" Kayla asked. "About marrying James?" "Not all. About giving a speech to 300 people?" "Terrified." The wedding reception would also serve as the foundation's 3rd anniversary celebration. Donors, survivors, and supporters from across the country had gathered to witness both the ceremony and the announcement of their latest expansion. The Collins Foundation is opening its first international office in London, Denise would tell the crowd later. Because financial fraud doesn't stop at national borders, and neither should recovery resources. But first, there was a smaller, more private ceremony to witness. As Denise walked down the garden path, she passed faces that told the story of everything she'd built since Richard's arrest. Patricia Chun had flown in from Dallas with her new husband. Maria from Phoenix stood beside Jennifer from Charlotte. Susan from Tennessee held hands with the pediatric surgeon she'd married the year before. But it was the faces of the women from the residential program that moved Denise most. 23 current residents and dozens of graduates had gathered to celebrate with the woman who turned her biggest mistake into their greatest opportunity. The ceremony itself was simple. James and Denise exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising partnership rather than passion, transparency rather than romance. When the minister pronounced them married, the applause came not from polite society guests, but from people who truly understood what they were witnessing. Two people choosing trust after both had experienced its betrayal. "I have something to tell all of you," Denise said during her reception speech. "This foundation exists because a man named Richard Collins thought he could destroy two women by turning them against each other. He thought our anger would make us weak." She found Kayla in the crowd, standing with David, the foundation's new clinical director, who'd been her partner for 6 months. Instead, our anger made us unstoppable, and our healing made us unbreakable. The foundation's success had exceeded every projection. They'd helped over 800 women recover financially and emotionally from romantic fraud. Their model was being replicated in 12 other cities. Universities were using their research to study the psychology of financial manipulation. But the most meaningful measure of success walked among the wedding guests. Women who'd arrived broken and left whole, who'd learned to trust themselves again, who'd built new lives from the ashes of old deceptions. I want to share something that happened last week, Denise continued. A woman called our hotline from Seattle. She discovered her husband of 15 years had stolen her business loan to fund his gambling addiction. She was considering suicide. The crowd grew quiet. These stories never got easier to hear, even for people who'd lived through similar experiences. Today, that same woman called back. She filed for divorce, recovered her stolen money, and started a new business. But most importantly, she said something I'll never forget. I didn't just survive what he did to me. I became someone he could never touch again. The reception continued long into the evening, but Denise found herself drawn back to the mansion itself. The house had been completely transformed since Richard's time, where his presence had felt heavy and false. The current atmosphere was light and genuine. The master bedroom where Richard had brought his mistresses was now Denise and James's private sanctuary, a space built on honesty rather than deception. The dining room where Richard had entertained with stolen money now hosted family dinners for the residential program residents. Most symbolically, Richard's former office had become the foundation's resource center, where survivors researched legal options and planned new futures. Mrs. Martinez, Kayla said, finding Denise on the mansion's front steps as the evening wound down. That's going to take some getting used to. Everything takes getting used to, Denise replied. 3 years ago, I thought my life was ending. Now I can't imagine it any other way. The foundation had given both women more than purpose. It had given them proof that the worst experiences could become the foundation for the best outcomes. Every woman they helped heal was evidence that Richard's power over them was permanently broken. I got a letter yesterday, Kayla said, from Richard. Denise felt her stomach tighten. They'd both received occasional letters from prison over the years. Apologies that felt calculated, requests for forgiveness that seemed designed to manipulate even from behind bars. What did it say? He wanted to know if we consider speaking on his behalf at his parole hearing in 5 years. They looked at each other and started laughing. The audacity was so perfectly Richard, assuming that the women he destroyed would somehow help him regain his freedom. What did you write back? Nothing. I threw it away without reading it twice. He doesn't get any more of my time or energy. Not 1 second. That was the final lesson Richard had inadvertently taught them. The opposite of love wasn't hate, it was indifference. The most powerful response to someone who tried to control your life was to remove them from it completely. As the last guest departed and James helped clean up the reception area, Denise walked through the mansion one more time. Every room held memories now, not of Richard's lies, but of truth's triumph. The library where he'd hidden financial documents now housed the foundation's resource collection. The wine cellar where he'd stored expensive bottles bought with stolen money now held boxes of legal precedents that helped other fraud victims. The house itself had been cleansed and reclaimed, transformed from a symbol of deception into a beacon of recovery. Come to bed, James called from upstairs. Tomorrow's going to be busy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more women needing help, more legal battles to fight, more predators to stop. But tonight, Denise felt the deep peace that comes from a life aligned with its true purpose. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, successful on the surface but hollow underneath, married to a man she'd never really known, living in a house built on foundations of lies. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone Richard could never have imagined, a woman who transformed his worst manipulation into her greatest strength. The house that Truth built wasn't just the mansion or the foundation offices or the residential programs. It was the life she'd constructed from the wreckage of his deceptions, solid, honest, and completely her own. As she turned off the lights and headed upstairs to her new husband and her real life, Denise smiled. Richard had thought he was taking everything from her. Instead, he'd given her the chance to build something he could never touch, never manipulate, never destroy. Something real, something true, something that would outlast them all. The house she owned wasn't made of brick and mortar. It was made of character, purpose, and the unbreakable bonds between women who'd survived the unthinkable and chosen to help others do the same. And nobody, not Richard, not anyone, could ever take that away from her again.